On Global Lens today, we look at the US-India partnership in artificial intelligence. This is part of CNBC-TV18's ongoing collaboration with one of the world's leading think tanks, Center for Strategic and International Studies, based in Washington, D.C. Our aim is to put the focus on major areas of opportunity ahead of the India A.I. Action Summit in February 2026. Earlier, during the Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to the White House to meet President Trump, both leaders announced the US-India Trust Initiative. TRUST stands for Transforming the Relationship Utilizing Strategic Technology Initiative. As part of this, both sides have committed to work with US and Indian industry on accelerating AI infrastructure development and accelerating build-out of US-origin AI infrastructure in India. Over the last few months, we have seen Google, Microsoft announcing investment plans to build AI infrastructure in the country. On the show today, we look at how American leadership in AI technology and India's innovation ecosystem can collaborate on developing artificial intelligence solutions, how we can increase investments in Indian AI companies, and how the Quad framework can work towards deepening research in AI. We're now joined by Richard Rossow, Senior Advisor at Center for Strategic and International Studies, and Jacob Gullish, Executive Director of Policy, Digital Economy and Media Entertainment at US Chamber of Commerce. Rick, let me begin by asking you, is the trust initiative between India and US actually living up to its full potential?
I think it's been a little slow getting out of the gates. Part of that's driven by the fact that we've been unable to get our pending trade agreement across the finish line, and a lot of bilateral engagements have actually been slowed down trying to get that first big thing done that the two leaders announced when they met earlier this year. I think once the trade agreement happens, you're going to see probably a lot more of the day-to-day engagement for different initiatives, including trust. Trust, of course, is a successor to the very successful ISET, but because that's driven by the U.S. National Security Advisor, you've got a smaller staff. You've had big changes in the U.S. National Security Council team members. You've got Secretary Rubio that's managing both the National Security Council staff as well as the State Department. So there are some other challenges you have to overcome, but I'd say getting the trade agreement across the finish line is going to be the first big step to unlocking the rest of engagements, including on the Trust Initiative.
Right. Let me also get in Jacob at this point. Jacob, we have seen some major announcements by U.S. companies. We've seen a $15 billion investment commitment by Google. We've seen a $3 billion investment commitment by Microsoft. The likes of NVIDIA, OpenAI, they've announced plans for the India market as well. But could you give us a sense of the difference in approach and priorities of American AI companies and startups and Indian AI companies and startups, and where the two can actually meet?
Very wonderful. Well, there has been long-term synergies between the United States and India around the technology ecosystem. It's evolved and changed. And now as we enter the new AI age, there will be some adjustments to it. At its core, India's value proposition is based on strong and large technical skill. There's a lot of cost synergies there as well. And on the American side, it's about access to market, access to capital, and sort of the corporate understanding of how a lot of global markets work. When you bring those together, it's a really powerful team. Now, what does this mean for AI? There's a lot of discussions about how India is evolving its ecosystem, how it's moving up value, how it's expanding, and what that really means for American companies, and perhaps how that even changes over time. The sort of traditional value propositions have evolved, and American companies are looking at India to help it grow and help it innovate and tie it back to the United States ecosystem. So when you talk about some of these very large investments, they're part of global activities where India is going to be playing a key part and increasingly a greater and greater element of the international hub of innovation. And so what you're seeing is American companies tapping that in the way they have in the past, but also tapping the evolution and how India is increasing its ability to provide creativity and innovative services. What that means for smaller companies versus larger companies is there's actually an exciting movement where India's startup community is starting to look at the American market. It's evolving, it's growing, and increasingly able to integrate itself with other ecosystems out of Silicon Valley and elsewhere. And so when I talk and meet a lot of Indian companies, what I stress for them is not to always focus on the technology itself. We know India is super strong there. there. We know there's a lot of momentum and excitement. But it's this larger ecosystem around business capabilities. You have to follow the money and know your customers. And as the Indian startup community gets stronger and more mature, they'll be able to better tap into these enterprise networks around the world and be successful.
Right. Important points there. Let's also focus for a moment on the India AI Action Summit, which we're really building up to. And CSIS and CNBC-TV18 are putting the focus on the priorities that we need to focus on as India tries to leapfrog in this AI race. Rick, if I were to ask you about how do you see this AI summit in India coming up? How would US companies, US government officials, and the AI ecosystem in America be looking at developments here?
Well, I think there's probably two lenses that we consider first and foremost. I mean, of course, with the current U.S. administration, they're very focused on what partnerships mean for U.S. job creation and economic vibrancy. So there, I think the lane might be a little bit narrow in terms of how the U.S. government approaches. I don't know that they have a defined approach in how they're thinking about the AI Impact Summit. What I hope that the plan is going to be, again, kind of flows on two tracks. The first, which Jay and I have already talked about, is what it means for U.S.-India. And I think there's a lot of great learnings we had from the original IT services revolution, where India's terrific talent at low prices can drop down prices for delivering products that the world had never seen before. And I think a lot of that can be replicated in artificial intelligence, frugal innovation 2.0, where the United States is breaking ground and spending so much money. It's going to be hard for India to keep up developing, the leading edge models. But what India could do is actually find ways for maybe models that are a generation behind to have wide-scale application for improving delivery of healthcare, delivery of electrons, a whole range of things that are going to help India and other countries with its development goals. So that's the U.S.-India lane. But the second lane that I think is a lot more interesting, and I hope this is part of what the United States approaches the AI Impact Summit with the U.S. government when it happens next year, which is how we can collaborate for helping the world solve some of its grand challenges. And maybe this will be done bilaterally, maybe it'll be done through the Quad, where we had some experience before on global money, Indian expertise, delivering products for the global South. But I do hope that ahead of the summit as well, we can start to think about ways that our collaboration can actually confer benefits across the Indo-Pacific and across the world. So I don't know the administration has yet thought and has prepared a plan for how it's going to approach the actions, the AI Impact Summit. But that's the two threads, Parikshit, that I certainly hope that we do take up, and it really is kind of a central theme for how we engage for the summit coming up.
And Jacob, when it comes to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, as somebody who is very familiar with the digital economy ecosystem in the U.S., what do you think will be some of the reform measures that U.S. companies would be looking at from India, or the kind of messaging you would be looking at from the Indian government at the AI Action Summit?
Well, great. So one of India's core competitive advantages in technology is scale. And I think that's exactly what we're going to see at the AI Impact Summit. This has been an ongoing series of events that started in the UK and went to South Korea and France, and now India is the short-term steward of that, and it'll go somewhere else. But India also will show its incredible capabilities across the full breadth of not only AI, but its technology leadership. It set out a handful of principles, and there'll be major events and discussions around each of those. Things like technology and compute and data sets, but as well as some of the other kind of human actions and problem solvings that Rick mentioned. And it's going to allow India to pull in the global community and really position itself going forward as a leader, not only in AI technology, but in the area of governance. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, we look at this as a long-term process to develop innovative, light-touch guidelines that'll help AI develop over a period of time. And I would think that industry, whether it be Indian or American, is looking to the Indian government to do the same. There are obviously things of concern around AI, but they're manageable. And so balancing this innovation versus risk and providing the opportunities for innovation creativity, but coming up with solutions that do manage risk are important. And I think India is looking at those currently. There's been a few reports that the government has produced, and they do exactly that. There's one other element that India is promoting, and that has to do with digital public infrastructure. And India is a leader in DPI. And these are tools and platforms and mechanisms that can perhaps find synergies and help optimize large-scale markets around technology. And they're looking at how to integrate AI into these DPIs. And that's something that the United States could also learn and share as well. So I think there's tremendous opportunities, not only in the summit itself, but how it might bring together the two ecosystems to drive forward the AI innovation opportunity over a long period of time.
Right. Richard, you look at reforms in India at the central and state level on a weekly basis. When it comes to trade controls, data sharing, and regulatory alignment in AI, what needs to be done at the earliest to allow unleashing of the full potential of the US-India partnership in artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I think, there's probably two big issues India still has to kind of grapple with. The first is what data is actually must remain secured and proprietary. Things that are related to India's national security, intelligence community, military establishment. Those are things where a lot of that's going to have to be kept in-house, and tools are going to have to be created domestically for those areas. But for everything else, this is where I think there's tremendous level of promise, where you've got data sets a lot of times that are held in paper binders in government offices around the country, district offices and places like that, that have really important detail on how power grids function, how water systems work in India. A lot of the nuance that ultimately stronger information systems can actually help to pinpoint where challenges and obstacles remain and things can be unlocked. And that's really the promise for artificial intelligence tools to promote public service delivery and help with human development writ large. And one of the really neat things, for me, who's been really spending a lot of time in the last year engaging a lot of America's leading companies that are working on artificial intelligence, is you still have that kind of sort of founder syndrome where they want to do great things for the world. It's not just all about making money. And ultimately, if they can unlock commercial promise while helping solve grand human development challenges, that's going to be quite important. So I'd say two big things for India to think about. One is making sure that they have a really strong view in terms of what data must remain secure and what could actually be useful to the world to help solve challenges. And then the second is unlocking all that data that's kept in different corners of India that can be leveraged and used for artificial intelligence companies to provide those data sets that can actually really provide a massive lift for human development. So that's the two things I think about, Parikshit.
All right. Now, moving forward, Jacob, what do you think will allow India to attract more investments from the United States? The trade deal is one. Even the stock markets in India are watching the possibility of a trade deal very closely. But on the whole, what kind of messaging, what kind of reforms, according to you, will unleash more investments from the US venture capital PE ecosystem into Indian startups? And would there be certain solutions, certain kinds of AI companies which the US ecosystem would be more interested in?
Yeah, well, there's two or three things I think we need to think about. One is technology specific. The government of India needs to develop a whole broad set of policies, whether it's AI, telecoms, information and broadcasting. All of these need to come together because the way there's more than one type of data. There's in fact there's a lot of different types of data, and they're coming from different elements of technology. There's video in multiple languages and documentation, as well as this sort of traditional data that comes across texts and whatnot. And so having policies across the entire technology landscape that enable this data to move between the two is really important, so that the telecommunications and the IT and the broadcasting sector are, to a certain degree, aligned and interoperable. So that's one thing that will be very attractive to American technology companies. The other is more broad-based. It's generally the ease of doing business. It's things around labor codes and taxes and transportation and infrastructure. That will raise all boats, so to speak. But technology companies are very invested in those sorts of policies. And so if you're able to bring in those two sets of reforms, it's going to enable and interest a lot more American companies and international companies, as well as Indian companies, to develop those products and services that target the Indian market. The last thing that needs to be done is every market's a little different, and the way India operates and what's valuable to government and industry and society in India is going to be different. And so those products need to be tailored to the local market. And one, demand is obviously that key issue there. And as Indian demand for these products and services grow, there'll be a natural supply, whether that's domestic or international. But if you have the overall ecosystem of policies that make it easy to invest, easy to develop, easy to protect your intellectual property, and frankly, easy to pull your money out when you're finished with your investment. Those are some of the key things that business leaders around the world are constantly looking at. And they're also looking at it not only from just a pure India point of view, they're comparing it to other markets around the world, other innovation-heavy countries, whether it's the United States or Israel or Malaysia. Companies are constantly thinking about how and where and why to invest.
All right. Rick, when it comes to the healthcare sector, how do you think American technology and India's frugal innovation system, these are areas you've often spoken about in the past, but how could it help solutions in the health sector? How could it be profitable and make business sense for startups and businesses in both countries?
Yeah, a lovely question, Parikshit. And I think this really gets at the beating heart about how most people are going to, achieve some level of change in their lives because of artificial intelligence. I mean, here in the United States, you think a lot of the professional services that AI tools might be able to swap out. Change doesn't come easy. And we've got a system that works fairly well. A lot of professionals, doing accounting, whether, in finance and doing, things like radiology, studying scans and healthcare, where the system isn't perfect, but it works pretty well. And in India, when you think you get outside the major urban areas and you've got a massive dearth of talent for a lot of these basic services, that's where I think the promise really kind of lies. So you've already got software systems right now that are better in a lot of areas than a human is on looking at a medical scan and trying to determine, is there a bone break or what's going on. But, again, in the United States, change is going to become very slow because radiologists are a very powerful group. They have a lot of political influence. And, the idea about healthcare systems swapping out people with systems, it's going to be slow and moving. But for India, you might have massive blowout solutions along these lines that would be impossible to have here in the United States. And that I think where a lot of the promise lies. Here, if it's going to be changing and upending a system where you've got a lot of entrenched interests, is going to move more slowly. In India, where maybe it can accelerate things the government already wants to do at a pace, and you're not going to be upending a system, that I think is where we see a lot of the excitement and promise. So I can't wait to see what happens next in that front, Parikshit.
All right. And finally, Jacob, when it comes to Quad cooperation, clearly we're not using the full framework of the Quad to focus on artificial intelligence, which is really a big challenge for the future. Do you think there is anything that India can do to accelerate that?
Well, the Quad's a really interesting and powerful organization. At its origin, it had a national security and military aspects. And so as it converts into a more general civilian and even into a commercial organization, we have to understand where it came from. It's also because it's a grouping of 4 democracies. Democracies are sometimes messy. There's changes of government and changes of policies. So I think when it comes to the Quad, AI does have an important role, but I think it should be narrow and focused. A couple of things the governments are looking at, I think, are powerful. One is connectivity, where subsea cables need to be protected, but they also need to expand to allow data to move, to allow the processing, to allow the solutions that we've all been talking about here. And so that connectivity is one element where the Quad can play a very powerful role. The other is data centers, where if you take those 4 countries together, they represent a very large market. If you can find the alignment and the cost synergies across and have the trust and the connectivity, you don't have to build, rebuild, overbuild data centers in every single country. Yes, of course, there's going to be some local. We need to have edge computing, and some products and services need latency, but also some can move around and be processed. And so that efficiency in the overall global ecosystem, or global infrastructure in this case, is really important. And the Quad is a foundation for trust that I think enables that.
All right. Thank you very much, Jacob Gullish and Richard Rossow, for joining us. Great to hear your views on the US-India partnership in AI as part of the CSIS CNBC-TV18 series ahead of the India AI Impact Summit. Time for a short break, but don't go anywhere.